Nintendo found their first big video game success with Donkey Kong. Who cares? I don't. I've been told this fact by 500 different top 10 retro gamers extreme facts videos. Yeah, there are other Nintendo arcade games that people care less about, like, I don't know, Popeye, Donkey Kong 3, and the Play Choice and Versus system games, but at least you've heard of those and likely have played them before. Prior to their breakthrough with Donkey Kong, they made some electromechanical games that I won't be playing today because obviously you can't emulate those, but before Donkey Kong, they made some rather low-quality titles, and even after, there are a few games that have slipped through the cracks. So today, we'll be taking a look at some of the less than stellar arcade games from Nintendo that no one wants to play anymore. For several of these early Nintendo arcade games, Ikegami Tsunshiki assisted with the programming. Basically, the game designers at Nintendo would work with this company to produce many of their arcade titles. They went uncredited, but claimed ownership of their code. When Nintendo developed Donkey Kong Jr. on their own, they pissed off the Ikegami boys and they got hit with a court battle. They settle out of court, but because of this altercation, Nintendo doesn't want to keep their old titles relevant, and instead opts to re-release the NES versions. In recent times, the arcade originals have been put on Switch under the Arcade Archive series, but most of their arcade gameography remains unknown. So I'm going to take a deep dive into all these buried games from Japan's largest corporation. Let's kick this off with Space Fever from 1979. This wasn't their first video arcade game, but it's the earliest one you can play in MAME. The ones that aren't available include Block Fever and Computer Othello. Block Fever is a breakout clone, and I'll let you figure out what Computer Othello is. As you've guessed by the footage, this is an unabashed Space Invaders clone. Literally, it's the exact same game with trivial differences. So yeah, Nintendo, who's built up a reputation for being rigid with their IPs, got their start ripping off someone else's game. Go figure. This plays just a little worse than Space Invaders. The invaders are smaller, and their movement patterns are a little more jerky. When you get down to the last couple of rows, they start moving down in larger increments. This makes the game just a little bit harder than what you'd be used to with regular Space Invaders, but not by that much. There are a couple of other modes to dig into here, but they're not that different. Game B spawns in rows one at a time from the bottom up. I think this might be easier than Game A just because the game guides you on what to hit first so you don't end up out of space by the end of the round. For Game C, I genuinely couldn't tell the difference until after I was done playing and watched the footage back. In Game A, there's this little space here between the invader columns, and in C, they get rid of that space. Quite innovative here. I don't know what else to say, it's just Space Invaders. Space Fever was so influential that it received a sequel, SF High Splitter. It's a slight variation on the original. Instead of having a bunch of little guys, there's these big aliens, and when shot down the middle, they disappear. If your aim isn't that good and you don't shoot right down the middle, they will be SF high split in half. Modes A through C are the same as the original Space Fever. So one thing I'm going to be doing in this video is seeing how these games influenced modern Nintendo games. And as far as Nintendo influence goes, the only thing I can see in Space Fever are the game modes. Game & Watch games have game modes A and B, along with the early black box games. Come on, I'm stretching it here to find something. This is not even an original Nintendo game. They didn't take anything from 1979's Space Fever. Space Fever actually received a third game. Say hello to Space Fever 2. This is a minigame in the Game Boy camera, but they still called it Space Fever. It's pretty much nothing like the 70s Space Fever games, as in they developed something original. Its only similarity is it also being a vertical shooter. If you want to try out Space Fever for some reason, I guess go with High Splitter because it's slightly more interesting, but apart from historical significance, there is literally no reason to play Space Fever over Space Invaders. Sheriff. You might have actually heard of this game. Sheriff makes a cameo in Super Smash Bros. As an assist trophy, and is even an unlockable game in the original WarioWare. Could this mean that this is the first true good Nintendo game before Donkey Kong? Not really. Personally, I didn't enjoy Sheriff all too much. The controls are clunky as hell. It's a twin-stick shooter, possibly one of the first as it predated Robotron, but Sheriff's movement and aiming speeds are sluggish. This game has to play better on a real cabinet. It was designed for this unique control scheme that can't be replicated at home very well. Being Miyamoto's first game, I guess I was expecting more here, but I'm not too impressed. To be honest, I shouldn't have set my hopes anywhere. These are the company's first arcade games, and some of the earliest games in general, but with how much Sheriff is referenced in modern Nintendo, I guess he is nothing more than a legacy callback. However, historically, Sheriff is crucial to Nintendo. There's some elements in this game that would go on to influence future, better Nintendo titles. This is Nintendo's first instance of the damsel in distress motif, I believe. After a couple of rounds, there's this bonus cutscene of the Sheriff, and definitely not Pauline, meeting up and having this heart sprite, and that very same heart sprite was reused in Popeye. While it is very similar to Space Invaders, it is different enough to be considered an original game. One more fun fact, Sheriff saw a rebranded release as Bandito by Exidy. Yes, that Exidy behind some of gaming's first controversies such as Death Race and Chiller. I would love to cover the history of Exidy as I find them incredibly fascinating, but I'll save that for another time. If you want to play Sheriff, definitely unlock it in WarioWare. That version not only has Wario, but it controls a hell of a lot more smoothly. If you have to experience the original Miyamoto developed game, I guess give it a whirl in MAME, but personally about after 15 minutes of play I was sick of it. It's important, but best saved for these history videos we YouTuber dorks make, instead of you actually playing it. Space Launcher. I think I might consider this Nintendo's first original game so far. Don't get me wrong, it's of its era with the whole space theme, and yeah, that arcade flyer is a blatant ripoff of Star Wars. I mean, come on, they weren't even trying to hide it here. But I can consider this gameplay somewhat unique. In fact, it's similar to Frogger, but predates it, so I guess the knockoff tables have turned, huh? You play as Space Launcher and must launch yourself into space. As you embark on your space launch, you'll come across space aliens to launch by and space docks to launch into. There's no fire button, but about halfway through the playing field, some pixels surround the end of the ship, serving as sort of a barrier shield thing to take out aliens. I think I'm actually going to call the controls decent here. Dodging feels solid, and it's not sluggish like the past few games. I guess I'm hyped up about finally playing a decent enough game. I can't find too many similarities here between their more well-known classics, but I suppose you could call this the first Nintendo game that's actually worth a shot playing. Monkey Magic is the cursed, lost prequel to Donkey Kong Nintendo wants you to forget about. It actually started here in 1979, and you won't believe what they're hiding. Nah, I'm just kidding. This is a breakout style game, and while I don't have myself a paddle controller, I made sure to configure my mouse well enough to control it accurately. However, despite all of this, I believe this game controls a bit clunky. The ball is unpredictable, but not in a good way. It speeds up and slows down at random. I found this game frustrating because of a lot of cheap drains caused by the aforementioned physics. Also, maybe you've noticed this, but this game is fucking terrifying. You bounce a ball to drive stakes into a monkey's head, knock all his teeth out, melt his face off, and worst of all, destroy his hat. This game definitely has the whole cursed arcade game look and feel to it. I don't think I'd be surprised to find a dead guy shoved into a monkey magic cabinet. Truth be told, it's not that bad of a game despite the less than stellar physics. There are a lot of neat scoring mechanics and targets to hit. In the skin melting phase, hitting both eyes brings the jaw back for extra ball bouncage. These skulls send the ball flying, so they make for sort of a trap to avoid. I'm not sure what these restroom sign looking icons do, but they exist. While not fantastic in gameplay, I can't help but find this game fascinating. The unnerving visuals paired with it being incredibly rare. Rare as in you couldn't emulate it until 2015. That just makes this game so much cooler. It really is a real-life cursed game. Head On is a Sega game. I even own it as part of the Sega Ages Memorial Selection on my beloved Sega Saturn. Great! What does this have to do with Nintendo? Well, they published the sequel on their own arcade boards. Seriously, Nintendo published Sega's own Head On 2 as Head On N in Japanese arcades. 20 years before the infamous rivalry, they were getting a clone license to produce their own version of a Sega title. Head On is a bit of a revolutionary game as it's the first maze-style arcade game. Predating Pac-Man by a year, you collect dots and avoid enemies. Rally X is a bit of a spiritual successor to this game, so it's better to compare it to that. Still, this game's pretty neat. Out of all the games shown here today, I have the most experience with this one, but I gotta be honest, I'm kinda trash at it. I doubt many people are actually good at this game. Head On is, to put it bluntly, bullshitty. You wouldn't think a 1979 game's AI could be capable of outsmarting you, but it does. I found a good strategy to just focus on the enemy car and keep your own in your peripheral vision, but I still got blown up a ton. The sound effects are comically awful. For the era, they sound about as realistic as they could pull off, but to your ears, it's a horrible squeak and a buzzing whir. Call me a Sega apologist, because I 100% am one, but I find this 40-year-old jank-ass car game a good time. This won't be the last time we see Head On a Nintendo console, as it got a port to the Game Boy, believe it or not. I like this game, but it might not be for you. Bomberman. Just like Head On, this is a licensed clone of another company's game, this time Namco. Bombi is Namco's second ever game, a sequel to the first known as GB, and was designed by the legendary Toru Iwatani. Yeah, the guy from Adam Sandler's 2015 box office smash hit Pixels. Bitch. Love that movie. Yep, there's the Namco logo dead center in this Nintendo game. Bombi is like a combination of both Breakout and Pinball. Not only are there the classic breakable blocks, but also pop bumpers and a spinner in the middle and drains on the sides. I love both Pinball and Breakout, so Bombi is a winner. Despite being one of their earlier titles, it's got that Namco addictiveness and charm. Unlike Head On, the sound effects aren't an assault on your ears and pleasantly okay. Compared to Monkey Magic, the physics are night and day. It controls realistically and smoothly, making it an actually fun game to play. Bombi makes it feel good to hit balls, something Monkey Magic did not achieve. Every game thus far has had flaws that make them either mediocre or just plain bad, but this is the first instance of a game that's just simple arcade fun. It's not a Nintendo game technically, but since then, the companies have collaborated on several games. From the Nintendo Triforce arcade board to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, there's a lot to be said about the relationship between these two Japanese super corporations. If you want to play Bombi, it's featured as a secret bonus in the Japanese version of Namco Museum 2, alongside its superior sequel, QTQ. Okay, I guess I'm getting way off track here, being a Namco arcade dweeb. I'm gonna save the Namco Museum games for another time. Bombi is surprisingly fun, but it's not a Nintendo game. Space Firebird is a Nintendo game. Yep, we're finally back to talking about Nintendo games in this Nintendo games video. We're also finally entering the 1980s with this one. Remember the 80s? I'm sure you don't remember the 80s. It's a shooter similar to Galaxian, but it's not a ripoff. There are space birds, and yep, they fire. Fire back to get the points. The graphics here are a noticeable step up from the previous games. Animations of the birds soaring look nice as they bob and float down. The smooth firing from the enemies also looks cool for the time. The ship moves at a bit of a curve on the bottom of the screen, going up a little bit at the sides. Each level consists of a set number of birds that's shown on the top of the screen. If the barrage gets a little too overwhelming, press B and gain an invincibility shield. The enemies are not only varied in design, but health. Some take one shot and others will take up to 4. I like this mechanic because it adds more skill into the game. You have to learn which birds take what amount of bullets and how to strategize hitting them before they reach the bottom of the screen. Space Firebird got sort of an update sequel game called Space Demon. This is essentially the same game, but with a more polished presentation. The ship sprite is changed up, it's much larger, making dodging more difficult, but this is probably the better game. For their time, Space Firebird and Demon aren't the best shooters out there. I would take Galaga or Moon Cresta every day, but Nintendo here is shaping up to make some decent games for once. They released 2 other shooters later in that year of 1980, the next one being Hellfire. It's not a space shooter, it's a water shooter with a submarine. I love a good submarine shmup. This one's nice to look at. I love the gradient with the deep blue of the sea and the dark red of the sky. The simple small sprites do the job and look stylish too. Going in, I thought this game would be just alright. So far, everything's been mediocre at best. But I think I might enjoy this just as much as the more popular Nintendo arcade titles like Donkey Kong and Popeye. The gameplay is genuinely challenging without any clunky controls or other bullshit. The submarine moves at the perfect speed, and collision with your shots and the enemies feels just right. Hellfire is engaging because you not only have to shoot down a bunch of helicopters in the sky that gradually get faster, there's a whole bunch of other crap on the lower half of the screen to dodge. Super fast torpedoes, bullets from the sky, random debris, and waves of bullets in the sea are all out to get you. Learning the patterns of when these arrive and how to precisely maneuver through them is truly fun and addicting. This diagonal line of bullets took me a few rounds of genuine practice, and once I got that timing right, that's the kind of gameplay I love to see in a shmup. Space Firebird was challenging, but not interesting enough to hold my attention. Hellfire captivated me, and I didn't have to force myself to play it for footage. Not to brag, but I am quite the shooter fan myself, and I quickly became skilled at Hellfire. Ladies, one at a time. Okay, but seriously, this is a great game that you should try out. Sadly, it's stuck here in forgotten Nintendo arcade hell, and that's a real shame. For sure, give this one a shot if you're interested. The third game in the pre-Donkey Kong failed shooter trilogy is Radar Scope, which is somewhat recognizable to video game history fans. It's the game that flopped so hard it led to the creation of Donkey Kong. That little fun fact gets passed around and has most people assuming that this game sucks. In reality, it's not the worst. I think this game is extremely important in Nintendo history, because without it, who even knows what the company would look like today, or if they'd still be around. So let's pay Radar Scope the respect it deserves and give it a fair look. Like Space Firebird, this game takes that Space Invaders and Galaxian base, but innovates on it. You are tasked with defending the space station from Gamma Raiders. At first glance, it just seems like it's Galaxian, but at an angle. That angle isn't just a gimmick though. It's not only a premium showcase of graphics, it adds to the strategy of the game. Your ship can only hit certain parts of the grid, so you can study it and use it to your advantage for more accurate aiming. You have to focus on where the Gamma Raiders are on the grid to make sure you nab them. Near the end of the stage, they'll start dropping these pods. I actually thought these were power-ups and ran directly into one, meeting my untimely doom. These target the damage meter at the bottom. Once depleted, you'll lose a life. This adds some depth to the game, giving you something else to manage besides the Raiders. That's about it for the gameplay. It does everything an early arcade game could do right. Simple to learn, hard to master. Radar Scope has some actual polish put into it. The graphics and animations have their primitive charm, and you can definitely see how Donkey Kong was built off this game. Well, more so hear how Donkey Kong was built off this game. Right off the bat, I noticed that signature muffly, bassy Donkey Kong sound. Take a listen real quick. Like Hellfire, I believe this game to be as good as the popular cabinets at the time. Radar Scope is super important in Nintendo's history, yet not nearly enough people have experienced it. Just take a look at how far Nintendo has come in less than 2 years, starting with clunky, crappy, clear-cut knockoffs, to developing two somewhat original great games. No matter how good of a game it was, Radar Scope was just not innovative enough to be a success. It failed hard, as only 3,000 cabinets were made, yet Nintendo could only manage to sell a mere 1,000. As different as they are, Radar Scope walked so Donkey Kong could run. Soon after Radar Scope dropped and flopped, Donkey Kong was released and was a smash hit, and the next year Nintendo released Donkey Kong Jr. to even more cash. But wait. 1 month after Donkey Kong released, Nintendo put out a mysterious game to exponentially less fanfare that quickly got swept under the rug. That game is none other than Sky Skipper. It failed location testing and was quietly cancelled. For years, it remained a lost game. Out of all the games I've been talking about today, Sky Skipper is by far the most elusive. Before I get to the review, I gotta give huge shoutouts to Alex Crowley from the Nintendo Arcade YouTube channel. He's made lots of efforts towards preserving these obscure Nintendo arcade games, along with being part of the Sky Skipper project. This was an effort to find and preserve anything and everything related to Sky Skipper. Back in 2017, the fully restored, one-of-a-kind Sky Skipper machine was shown off at the Southern Fried Gaming Expo. I gave the shortest possible summary for brevity, but I highly recommend you check out the full story on the John's Arcade and Nintendo Arcade YouTube channels. The links will be in the description. Nintendo re-released the Sky Skipper ROM through the Arcade Archive series on Nintendo Switch, and here it is running in all its glory. It would be really funny after all of this incredibly fascinating history if the game sucked, but thankfully, it doesn't. This is truly a lost Nintendo classic that would have fit easily alongside Donkey Kong, Mario Bros, and Popeye. Sky Skipper is a lot less straightforward than all those titles. To be honest here, on my first time playing, I didn't have a clue what was happening. There's a bunch of crazy random stuff all over the place, like an aggressive Donkey Kong-esque monkeys trying to take you out with baseball equipment, bouncing card creatures, and strange but charming chunky backdrops. All of it comes together to make this odd fever dream of an arcade game, and I can't help but love it for that. The visuals are very primitive, but stylized. I love how colorful everything is. While he didn't do any of the programming, Shigeru Miyamoto was responsible for the artwork, and he hit it out of the park. The objective is to rescue the king's family, which is done by stunning the gorillas to release the family from cages. It's less of a shooter and more of its own unique dodge and collect type game. I enjoy it a lot. There's a bunch of different challenging stages to complete. I haven't actually made through all of them yet, and they do get pretty tough. The sound effects and music are also nice, and if that wasn't enough to sell you on the game, the victory screen reads as follows. Damn it. All escape! If you're only gonna play one game feature today, have it be Sky Skipper. Its super cool history and genuinely fun gameplay make it a great time. The fact you can buy it on Switch is also awesome if you're not one for tinkering with MAME. The final game doesn't fit in with the rest, but when else would I be able to talk about this? In fact, it was Nintendo's last arcade game they developed on their own outside of the Versus system stuff. Say hello to arm wrestling, the Punch-Out spin-off you never knew existed. If you love the goofy humor of Punch-Out, arm wrestling is right up your alley. This game is so stupid, I love it. Like Punch-Out, arm wrestling leaves about everything for you to figure out yourself, except it's significantly more cryptic. Once your opponent wins, that's it. There's no rounds, way to get back up, or anything. Your hand's on the table? Pop another coin in. Arm wrestling is done by mashing left on the stick, and when a character does their reaction move, you counterattack by flicking right and then mashing fire. It's incredibly simple and very bullshit. Often you won't figure out what to do until you've lost a couple times, but once you realize how to exploit the opponent's weakness, you won't lose much, if at all. The graphics here are unpolished as hell, but the funny designs and honestly crappy gameplay makes arm wrestling an ironically good time. There are only 5 enemies, so you can get through the whole thing in like 15 or 20 minutes. It's so funny and bad that I appreciate it. I would be overjoyed to see this at an arcade and promptly beat all 5 stages. Sadly, I've only seen it at one arcade, that being Galloping Ghost, and I didn't even play it. If you have some friends who are into arcade games, load this one up in MAME and make fun of it together. It'll be a great time. Or, you know, go outside to a real arcade with your real friends, but I have a hard time getting friends to go to arcades with me, or even getting real life friends in the first place. I am making YouTube videos after all. After arm wrestling, Nintendo pretty much dipped out of the arcade business, aside for a few Versus series titles here and there, and didn't return until the 2000s when they made stuff like F-Zero AX and Mario Kart Arcade GP, thus concluding this video. I had no clue most of these games existed going in, and it could have stayed that way. Yeah, they're mostly mediocre at best, but man, I just love their history. Nintendo is this hugely successful company that puts out quality after quality game, for the most part. So it's interesting to take a look at their forgotten rough start into gaming. I also realize that I have gaslit myself into enjoying bad video games with the slightest historical significance.